5 years ago this week, the world changed. No one wants to talk about that. We want to leave it in the past. Those were hard years. You know what I'm talking about. COVID 19, the coronavirus, the pandemic. But I firmly believe that on the fifth anniversary of the shutdown of America as we know it, there are lessons that we needed to learn then that we haven't learned, and I like to revisit them. So, starting today, I'm going to take a couple of weeks probably and drop a video every so often, and I want to share with you lessons that I believe we needed to learn that God wanted the American church to learn, Americans in general, but certainly the American church, that I don't necessarily think we've learned. I'm Kyle Henson. I'm the lead pastor of Spring Valley Church. I want to thank you for being with me. I think back 5 years ago, my family and I, when the pandemic broke out, had gone on a vacation to Florida. My wife's older sister and her family live in Florida, and we had gone to visit them and to go to Busch Gardens, ride some roller coasters. And my memory of the pandemic really spanned that week of vacation. One morning, I woke up to everybody hustling about, saying, hurry up, get dressed, we gotta leave for Busch Gardens. And I was rubbing the sleep out of my eye, looking for a cup of coffee. I said, we're not supposed to go to Busch Gardens for another day or two. And they said no, even though we had scheduled the Busch Gardens trip for later in the week. This is the final day Busch Gardens is open. They're closing down for the pandemic. Don't know when they're going to open back up. If we don't go today, we ain't going. And so we went to Busch Gardens. I remember at the amusement park recording videos on my phone that I was sending back to the church to keep our church here in Pennsylvania updated about how we were going to address the pandemic. So that's how it started. And you started hearing stories of grocery stores that were running out of toilet paper. So my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, they live directly across the street from a Publix grocery store. And so we would walk over and, just get snacks and stuff every day. And I remember the first day, I don't know what people are talking about. There's toilet paper. Like the second day, okay, the toilet paper's gone, but what are they freaking out about? There's tissues. Like the third day, okay, the tissues are gone, but there's still some wet wipes and there's some paper towels. Not as nice, but you can use it in a jam. And by the fourth day, nope, that grocery store was cleaned out. If you didn't have toilet paper, you were in trouble. And so when we flew back home, we flew into the Philadelphia airport. We had parked in long-term parking, and we were like the only car left. There might have been a handful of cars. And I remember we had the fastest drive from Philadelphia back to Reading. We made it from the Philly airport to Wyomissing, Pennsylvania in only about an hour. And I was like, man, there are some benefits of this pandemic. Things are actually not too bad. No traffic is on the road. But while all that was going on, before we got back to Pennsylvania, before we had the quickest drive of my life on the Schuylkill Expressway, when we were still in Florida, and every day we were seeing more and more things close down, and every day more and more paper products were disappearing from the grocery store shelves, I was talking to my niece. My niece was maybe 12, 13 years old at the time, and she said, it feels like people are acting like this is the apocalypse. And as soon as she said that, something registered in my spirit. And I said, yeah, this is an apocalypse. See, let me explain. A lot of times when we hear the word apocalypse, we think that it's the end of something. We hear the word apocalypse and we think of the end of the world. But the word apocalypse in Greek does not mean the end. In Greek, the word apocalypse simply means for something to be uncovered or something to be revealed. If something's hidden and you discover it, or if something is maybe covered over with like a dramatic piece of tarp and you pull it away to reveal it, that is an apocalypse. So, this is why, by the way, the last book in the New Testament in some Bibles is called the book of Revelation, and in other books it's called, or other translations, it's called the Apocalypse, because those words mean the exact same thing. And so when my niece said, this feels like the apocalypse, what she meant was, this feels like the end of the world. But what I heard was, this is an apocalypse. This is a time where things are going to be revealed. And I think if we can be proactive instead of reactive, right? So much of our life, we're reactive. So much of our life, we get triggered, and instead of responding, we react. But if we can actually respond and be proactive and have eyes to see, I think a lot of things were revealed during the pandemic that we need to address. And the reason I'm making these videos is because I think 5 years later, we have not addressed a lot of them. So, over the next however long, I don't know how often I'll drop these videos. Honestly, part of it depends on how much interest there is, how much comments I get, and how many views this gets. If people are interested, I'll go for a little bit. And if they're not, I'll stop. That's fine. But I want to talk about some of the things that were revealed, some of the lessons that I believe needed to be learned that have not been learned. I'm going to try and keep them short, no more than 15 minutes, maybe a little bit less than that. And today, I just want to say that the first thing that I think was revealed during the pandemic that I don't think has changed at all, I think it was revealed that social media is as much of a problem, and in fact, I think it's more of a problem than it is a solution. Now, I realize I sound like a hypocrite, because I have this up on YouTube, and I have mentioned that this is up on my Facebook page. So I'm not anti-social media. I think social media itself is neutral, but I think that the way that social media and the algorithms of social media play on our emotions are really a net negative. You see, during the pandemic, not only was all this fear being generated, and sometimes there was legitimate cause to be concerned. I'm not one of those faith over fear guys. Like, no, there's times to legitimately be concerned. But during the pandemic, there was all this fear. People who were fearful that they were going to lose all of their liberties and their rights because of the government. Other people who were fearful that they and everyone that they loved was going to die. Remember early on, it was almost like, I heard one comedian, I can't remember who it was, one comedian said, it was almost like we thought that COVID-19 was AIDS in the air. It was a death sentence, we thought, and we thought anybody could get it easily. Do you remember there were people who would go to the grocery store and wipe off and wash off and clean their food before they put it in the refrigerator? And we learned that you can't get COVID-19 that way. But people didn't know, and they were so afraid. Yeah, there was a lot of fear, a lot of hand wringing. And here we are 5 years later. And I still see people who in March of 2025, a few months after the election, no matter how you voted, they still have fear. Fear of what life is going to be like. Anxiety about what the government's going to do or what the government's not going to do. Anxiety about what's happening nationally and internationally. And in my experience, and I believe this was revealed, people who were more engaged in social media 5 years ago had greater degrees of fear and anxiety, no matter what side of the aisle they fell on. They either had fear that they were going to lose all of their rights, or they had fear that there wasn't going to be enough shutdown and everybody was going to die. And both sides had unjust fears, but those unjust fears were fueled by like minded people, echo chambers on social media telling them not what they wanted to hear, but echo chambers telling them what they were afraid to hear. And so people who were afraid that everybody in their family was going to get sick and die, man, echo chambers on social media and algorithms told them, yeah, unless you take precautions and unless everything shuts down, everybody's going to die. And people who were afraid that the government was going to take away their rights and their liberties, algorithms and echo chambers of social media, it made them feel like, yeah, you're going to end up in a dictatorship. They're going to take all your rights away. America, as you know, it's going to be gone. And 5 years later, did people die? Yeah. But it wasn't the Black Plague. Were social liberties in some states curtailed longer than others and probably a little bit longer than they needed to be? Yeah, but 5 years later, we're back to normal. We didn't permanently lose any of our civil liberties. And so when I see people today and they get afraid, there's news in the Ukraine and there's Russia and there's the Department of Education and there's what the economy's doing and the S&P 500 and it took another dip and there's all this stuff. Is this accurate? I'm not saying that it's not something to be concerned about, but 5 years from now, what the S&P 500 did today will be affecting your life 5 years from now. Russia and the Ukraine. God forbid that a global conflict breaks out. And we certainly don't want innocent people in the Ukraine to be killed. But in terms of your life, 5 years from now, the decisions that you make in your personal life today are going to have more to say and more to affect your future than what happens in a country halfway across the world. And that was true 5 years ago. Whatever the government decided to do, and some states were harder than others in terms of the lockdown, whatever the government decided to do, people's individual decisions had more to say into what their life was going to be than what happened around them. And so I think the first lesson that I just want to share is that social media isn't always a good thing. You can feel like you're connected, but that connection can be artificial. And in fact, you can be lonelier than ever while having your emotions manipulated. We don't need artificial connection. We need real, legitimate connection with people. And that's not easy. It's not easy because real connection with other people does not come from an algorithm. It happens organically. And when it happens organically and it's not from an algorithm, you don't get an echo chamber of people who agree with you and parrot back to you what you're already thinking. Instead, you get people who at first you might like, but then you realize they have very different views in certain areas than you do, and you have to decide, would you rather have a real connection with somebody who's different than you, or would you rather have an artificial connection with echo chambers that just parrot back to you what you want to hear? I was talking to a friend of mine as I was processing some of these thoughts, and he said, Kyle, you say that you limit your social media exposure, but isn't that a position of privilege? And maybe it is. Maybe there are marginalized groups that need social media to be connected and feel less isolated. But in my experience, even marginalized groups can have their emotions manipulated by the very technology that you're watching this video on. So I would say, at the conclusion of my first video, give yourself, whatever your gender or race or background, give yourself the gift of the privilege of disconnecting from social media and actually connecting with some real flesh and blood people. The relationships might be more challenging because they're going to have their own opinions, but they will be far more rewarding. Hey, if you found this interesting, I'm looking at some notes here. I have some more things I'd like to share. So if you'd like to hear that, put some comments down. If you have any questions you'd like me to address, put those in the comments. I'll try to answer those. Like this, share, and subscribe to my channel. I'm not trying to make a full YouTube channel. It's not my goal, but I want to do a series of these videos reflecting back on the apocalypse of 5 years ago. So, yeah, if there's enough interest, we'll keep going. God bless. Have a great day.